Are there platform fees in the RIA model? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 120. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you start out by heading on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about platform fees and do they exist in the RIA model. So for some of you, you might not be paying platform fees currently where you're at. Either way, it will help you to understand what exists in the RIA model. But others of you are perhaps paying so-called platform fees. That's something typically seen in the independent broker-dealer space. So an example of where a so-called platform fee comes up is perhaps you're, again, independent broker-dealer, and they give you some payout. And the payouts oftentimes can be this seemingly high percent, perhaps, 90%. You think, wow, I got a 90% payout. But then it turns out, well, there's also a platform fee. And so what that might be is you get 90% payout, but there's also a platform fee of 10 basis points, or I've seen 25 basis points. And oftentimes I'll hear advisors say, it's like, yeah, but the client pays that. So, but you got to think, and I've talked about this in other episodes, you got to really run this math and say, hey, what are the economics? Well, essentially, what's the true payout to you? And so let's take a simple example of where a platform fee could come in and how that applies. So let's say you as the advisor charge the typical 1% fee, and you get this 90% or maybe even higher payout on that, and you think, wow, that's a good payout. But then it turns out there's also a 25 basis point platform fee that the client pays in addition. So the reality is, and you as the advisor, well, I'm not paying that, the client's paying that. But the reality is the client in this example is paying 125 basis points total for the value and services you are providing them. But you are only compensated on the 100 basis points that then goes through your 90% grid. You're not compensated on this platform fee. So if you were to take your 90 cents in this example and divided into the full 125 basis points, that is really arguably your true payout, and it is not 90%. It's meaningfully less than that. And so you got to kind of run this math and say, okay, what are the economics truly for the client, and then truly for me as the advisor? How much of the total fee the client is paying for all the value and services I as the advisor are providing them, how much of that actually flows to me? And oftentimes I come across this, again, particularly independent broker-dealer scenarios, that there is that separate platform fee, and you need to mentally reset and don't trap yourself. Well, the client pays that, or that's separate for my payout. The client doesn't care who gets what behind the scenes. The client only knows how much are they paying, and then you can determine how much actually flows to you. And so with that background, I just want to, and this episode won't be too long, what I want to talk about is what sort of, if any, so-called platform fees exist in the RIA space, because then you want to make sure you're doing this, a comparison, a true apples to apples comparison. If you're saying, hey, what do I have now, whatever type of firm you're at now, and what would my practice look like in the RIA model, you want to make sure you are levelizing those economics and adding up all the associated fees, no matter what they want to call them. Platform fee, advisory fee, I've heard different names for them. So in the RIA space, in some instances, a short answer, in some instances, there's no platform fees or whatever you want to call them, that there's just not. Now, that's not to say that there's not costs associated with you running a practice in the RIA space, but there's some scenarios where there's just no so-called platform fee. But there are, I did want to share 3 examples of a fee that could occur that some people might refer to them as platform fees. Sometimes it's used a little different fee, but but it could be thought of as a platform fee. So I just want to kind of lay them out there and when they become applicable or where they would become applicable. So the first one, and this applies to whether you were to start your own RIA or potentially join an RIA. I've done multiple episodes on why you might choose one or the other. I help advisors down both paths. But let's start with the first one, is if you were to start an RIA. So if you were to start an RIA, okay, 100% of the revenue flows to you, you then have certain costs of running the RIA. One of the solutions that you need to rely on, in addition to like technology and compliance and whatnot, is a custodian so that you can have a place to have the client's assets. Some custodians charge a basis point fee for that service. Now, some don't charge it at all. Some charge it only in certain scenarios. I'll give you an example where that might come into play. Often that's referred to as a custody fee or a custodian fee. Again, it's usually expressed in basis points, usually just a single digit number of basis points. Some people might think of that or refer to that as some sort of platform fee. So I wanted to acknowledge that could be applicable in this situation. And so where might that impact you if you were to start your own RIA is, again, some custodians traditionally do not charge that. Others, in most cases, don't charge it, but depends on the economics of your practice. They might need to. I've done separate episodes I did an episode on how custodians generate revenue, and the reality is a custodian is providing a service. They are holding the assets in custody and clearing trades for your clients. They need to be compensated for that, obviously. So they need to generate revenue somehow. Well, depending on the profile of your practice, and there's a lot of variables that go into that, whether just the sheer size, the amount of assets involved, the investment products you use, how much cash you typically hold in accounts. A custodian would typically profile that and say, okay, hey, this is or isn't going to be a good relationship for us from a custodial side. And in some instances, they might say, hey, yeah, we would love to earn your business. We would love to work with you, but there will be a custody fee or a platform fee or whatever they want to call it of X basis points. And there's reasons that might still be the best solution for you versus a different custodial offering that doesn't have basis points, because it's not just price. That would be like a prospective client coming to you and just saying, well, what is your fee? And then going to some other advisor, say, what is your fee? And they don't even know what value and services are actually going to be provided for that fee. They just ask what the fee is. And so don't discount a custodian or a custodian situation. There might be basis point involved, because you want to say, well, what am I getting from that? And is that something maybe I would have to pay for separately if I were to go with this custodian over here? Helping you understand when that comes into play, which custodians handle this, which way. That's all something I help advisors with. Happy to chat with you as well about that and how it applies to your specific situation. But the first example is, again, there could be a custodian fee or whether you want to call it a platform fee that could exist or it might not exist. And that could be the case even if you join an RIA. So the second example I'll give of where a so-called platform fee, if you were to join an RIA, and I've done an episode on how the payouts of joining an RIA typically work, there's not, as I point out in that episode, there's not a lot of uniformity over how that is done from one RIA to the next. Whereas, for example, the 4 major wirehouses out there, while they have a couple different levers that they put in their comp plans, it generally is the same rough setup that you generate production and it goes through this grid, and there's a couple of variables that might move that number up or down or whatever the case is, but it's kind of going through a grid on a payout percent to you. In the RIA space, there's several different flavors of RIAs you could join and several different ways that they have priced it out. So some do it solely on a percentage payout basis. Others do it the inverse of that, whether on a percentage basis or percentage basis, or basis points. And then others do almost kind of a hybrid, and this is kind of where that platform fee could come into place, where they might say, hey, if you use our solution, here's all the wonderful things we provide for you. And there's 2 components to the pricing. One is a payout percent, and there's also a flat amount of, call it 5 basis points. Now, do they call that a custody fee? Do they call that a platform fee? Do they call it back office services fee? They call it whatever they want, but that sometimes exists where there'll be some sort of fee separate from the payout amount. Now, sometimes that can be to your advantage, particularly if it's done in basis points, because for some of you that maybe have some large clients, and so your ROA on your assets is arguably lower than other practices are, because you have larger clients, maybe charge lower fees, and so as a result, the benefits having the bulk of the payout or the bulk of the economics on a payout percent as to solely a basis points, because some platforms are solely on a basis points amount, can be to your benefit. But just know there are some that do have both of those scenarios where it could be primarily payout percent, but also maybe some basis points as well. Whether you want to call that a custody fee, a platform fee, whatever, that can exist. Also, that's, again, typically if you're joining an RIA, you would want to understand what those economics are. And then the third example where some sort of platform fee could come into place is if you are, whether with your own RIA or you're joining an RIA, there's essentially two ways to approach managing the client's assets. And a lot of RIAs do it one way, and a lot of RIAs do it the other way. So one is that you manage the assets yourself, right? And whatever your value prop is and however you manage it, that's great, and you do that. Other advisors and teams say, no, that's not the primary part of my value prop. I rely on, for whatever the motivations, maybe I think they can do it better, or better use of my time, or I can focus on financial planning more. So I outsource the asset management to some sort of third-party solution, and that could be models. There's the model marketplaces is a big thing nowadays. It could be SMA managers. There's several different ways to essentially outsource the management of the assets. I've done, this is typically accessed through a so-called TAMP solution. I've done an episode on what is a TAMP. Quick note on that, be very careful. That term TAMP is used in several different ways. So just don't assume someone says, oh, this is a TAMP solution, that you necessarily fully understand what they're offering, because there's some other solution that calls themselves a TAMP that can have a very different kind of offer. And so again, to the degree you want to dive into that, I did do that separate episode on what is a TAMP. But if you are accessing a TAMP, what I often refer to as a TAMP platform, so some sort of solution that gives you access to perhaps multiple models to choose from, or multiple SMA managers to choose from, there's typically two components to that. One is whoever's created that model typically is getting, and it's typically basis points, some sort of fee for putting that model together and managing it over time. Or that SMA manager, obviously, they are going to have to be paid for providing their services. But in addition to the essentially the manager fee, if you will, most TAMP offerings have some sort of platform fee as well. And that's fair, because however this TAMP offering is compiled, whether that's in-house at a larger firm that maybe is built that themselves, or you're relying on a third-party TAMP type solution that gives you access to multiple models or managers, there's a cost associated with building that platform, maintaining that technology, maintaining the relationships with who's making the models or the managers, and handling all the trades and all that stuff. There's logistics involved in that. And so there typically is that TAMP platform. And so you could argue that's a platform fee. Again, that only applies in this example if you are outsourcing the management of the assets to some sort of third party. There typically is some sort of platform fee associated with that. So one of the, and I'll leave you with kind of two tips here, but one of the main takeaways is hopefully you can understand there's different ways these fees can be referred to. There's different circumstances that they either are or are not applicable. And the main key or kind of takeaway I would say is just think it doesn't matter what any of these are called. It doesn't matter if some firm or some person or whatever calls it a platform fee, or calls it a custody fee, or calls it a TAMP fee, or whatever. All you should ask yourself is, okay, what is essentially the total cost of doing business? So I'm going to provide my clients with certain value and services. I need certain vendors, certain solutions to provide that. And what are the various fees associated with that? And how much essentially is ultimately coming out of my pocket? How much is essentially coming straight out of the client's pocket? And then let's look at it and decide what we like or don't like. But don't get caught up on what it's called, because again, that's a way to kind of I don't want to say kind of hide it, but that's, you see some large independent broker dealers and they throw out this large payout number. That's the only number they want to talk about is, wow, look how great or look how high our payout numbers. Well, it turns out we have this platform fee over here, which we didn't mention in the big headline advertisement we were talking about our payout. And you don't really care. You shouldn't really care. Call it whatever you want, guys. Just how much is the client paying? How much actually flows to me? And what do I and the client get for all of that fee? So don't get caught up on verbiage, but it is important to understand where these levers come into place, where this might be applicable, what the options are. Maybe you can avoid a fee by using one solution over another, but you got to be aware of what the different solutions are. So that's the first tip. And then the second one is, again, just make sure you're doing a true apples to apples comparison. I said this at the top. So if you are trying to say, hey, how does this look or work in the RIA space, and all you do is you get some number and that's the only number you get, and then you compare it back to just one number with whatever your current arrangement is, have you really fully built the pie? Have you added in all the fees, whatever they're called, come up with kind of a grand total, how much the client's paying, how much is actually going to you, and then done the same exercise over on a new path, whatever your new path is you might be explored. Let's add up all those pieces, call it whatever you want, I don't care, add them all up, and then do a true apples to apples comparison. So as a takeaway, just be aware that so-called platform fees or just different call fees can exist in the RIA model. And in some instances they don't. In some instances they do, but the reality is there's value being provided and you might need that value or that service regardless. So it just so happens to be built into some fee. But the key is understanding how does all of this work? How much should you realistically pay for it? Who are the solution providers out there? Why is one better than the other? How do each of them charge and where's the best value prop? That sort of thing. And that's the sort of thing I help advisors with all the time, to say, what do you have in your current arrangement? What do you have from your current firm? What does the RIA space look like? There's, as I talk about often in these episodes, there's all kinds of ways to potentially transition into the model. You need to understand the pros and cons of all those options, and then who are the various solution providers and why you might choose one over the other, and how are they different? How do they structure their pricing different, and how does that impact the decision you might ultimately make on whether to go down that path or not? Again, happy to help you think that through for your practice as well. First things first, though, as I said at the top, head on over to transitiontoria.com, where you can find all the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. But at the top on every page is a contact link. If you click on that, you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.